There's a quote out there that I strongly disagree with. AI will not replace accountants. It will replace accountants that don't use AI. The better way to phrase it is that it will replace a large percentage of the work of accountancy. Right now, there's a skepticism, the sort of I'll believe it when I see it kind of thing. And Daniel Susskind came to our conference in 2018 and started talking about exactly what's going to happen with this impact on not just accountants, but all professions. So now fast forward 7 years later, and everything he predicted is happening. Now, I do think, however, Kacee, that the more innovative accountants are going to be those that make friends with the low-code side of AI. Just like it's analogous to where the accountants that were most bleeding edge knew how to code their own zaps, so they could fill in all those gaps that where integration wasn't working right, and they stayed ahead of the curve.
Those firms that are listening that are in that bell curve and have been kind of standoffish, what's the first thing they need to do?
You've been tuned in to AI Native Accounting, powered by Digits, the world's first autonomous general ledger. Unlock automation for bookkeeping, reporting, client collaboration, and more. Let Digits handle the tedium so you can focus on high-impact client services. See why AI Native Accounting starts with Digits. Try it for free today at digits.com.
Welcome to the AI Native Accounting Podcast presented by Digits. Kacee Johnson, principal at Be Radical. And today I am joined by Joe Woodard, the founder and CEO of the Woodard Group, where he has built one of the most influential communities for accountants and bookkeepers. Joe, welcome. It's always great to have you with us.
It's good to be here, Kacee.
So Joe was very gracious and let us launch the AI Native Accounting Podcast earlier this summer at his conference, Scaling New Heights. It was the first time that I had been to the event in like a decade. And boy, has it grown. Joe, I've got to give you and the team massive kudos. I know firsthand what it takes to grow a large scale conference. And I was very impressed.
Well, thank you for that. We've definitely worked hard. This will be our 18th year coming up in June 2026.
I had no idea. Yeah, well, offline, we got to talk about what you got planned for the 20th. That's a big one.
Yes.
So one of the key themes that I noticed at the event was that AI is creating one of the biggest shifts we've seen since the mass adoption of cloud solutions, which was the last time I was there, right? It was at my time with Cloud9. And since this podcast is AI focused, let's just dive right in. Joe, what are you seeing in firms and from your community, the practitioners? What's the general pulse on AI?
Yes. So right now there's a skepticism. I almost was going to call it a healthy skepticism, but I don't know that it is healthy. The sort of I'll believe it when I see it kind of thing. And I get it because we've been talking about AI. It's been part of the narrative. Really, since I would date it back to Daniel Susskind was the origin story of it when he came out with The Future of the Professions in his book, 2015, heavily researched Oxford economist. And people thought that he was either ultra visionary or maybe insane, right? I mean, they didn't really know what they felt very sci-fi. And then when we addressed it and Daniel Susskind came to our conference in 2018, and started talking about exactly what's going to happen with this this impact on not just accountants but all professions. The data was there, but everybody just could not get their minds wrapped around it. Okay, so now fast forward 7 years later, and everything he predicted is happening. But accountants are still, I think, in mass, not the outliers, right? You always have your first adopters, you always have your innovators. But the mass of accountants are still taking I'll believe it when I see it, or it's way out in the future kind of approach. Because it's easy to believe that. It's convenient to believe that.
Well, and I get what you're saying that you and I, we're probably coming across at a lot of the events that we're at with more of like the tipping point, the early adopters. But when you say those, believe it when they see it. So they haven't seen it yet. They're not getting in and experimenting.
They're just ignoring it altogether.
Really?
Yes.
Okay.
Now I'm not talking about, again, the outliers. I'm talking about what I'm seeing in the mass of accountants, right? Which I think is the framing of your question. Many of them are not even going to ChatGPT and asking it a single question. And if they are, what I'm commonly seeing is that they're slowly getting familiar with using ChatGPT as a search engine on steroids. That's the extent of their use. Now, of course, this varies in firms based off of size. So I'm talking to you about the largest swath of the profession, which is in that small to emerging size firm space. We can talk about the top 100. They're doing something completely different. But especially when you get into the more mom and pop tax shops, right, or the CPA firms that are single partner or maybe a couple of partners, 10 professionals, they're just still in the daily work grind, being, I think, conveniently distracted, pleasantly distracted from what might happen in the future.
And I do see
Yeah, we're trying to sound a wake up call on that.
Yeah, and I do see a lot of that with the replacing Google, with it, which is great. I mean, to me, it's a much better experience, so I do it as well.
Oh, yeah.
But
It's definitely better than a search engine, no doubt.
100%, which gets us to a totally different conversation about, then how are people finding their businesses in the future? But I'm curious, though, are you seeing any practitioners in various service lines that maybe are leaning in a little bit sooner? Like is the CAS practice, the tax, the audit, assurance, like, is there an area that's maybe a little bit more attuned to adopting sooner?
Yeah, well, it's not so much an area as it varies firm to firm. It's how intentional the firm is, because I'm seeing artificial intelligence deployed in audit, tax, and CAS. I think its greatest impact is going to be on tax and CAS, at least in the short term. But when you start talking about data sampling, where you can sample in the thousands instead of sampling, in the 50 to 100 range, then audit effectiveness is going to go up, not just efficiency. And I think that's going to drive heavier adoption on the audit side. But I think the way the dominoes are going to fall is, I think CAS is going to be the first adopter, but without that sort of 90% full on capabilities that we've been able to see in some of these spiked, sort of clean room conditions. And I know that's becoming less clean room, a little bit more bleeding edge, and sort of, a larger percentage of client books that can be handled that way. We've seen digits drive that kind of technology is a good example, but that's still very frontier to the profession. So I think what they're going to do is they're going to end up using the tools that they've already been using. And those tools are going to become increasingly AI enabled. Xero just announced its JAX, Just Ask Xero product that just came out. And around that same time period, of course, just a couple months prior to that, Intuit has announced its Intuit Assist, which we all knew was coming. We just didn't know in what form it was going to hit the market and kind of what the waves of rollout are going to be. So, and then you're seeing all the other solutions start to follow suit, right? Let's put AI into what you're already using. I think then that will get us to some double-digit percentage adoption of AI, but it will be a largely passive adoption, right? Or at least a very convenient low-shelf adoption. I think the next wave you're going to see is going to be in embracing new technologies, because you discover those new technologies are more AI effective. And we could break down why AI enabled versus sort of an AI first platform. I mean, I'd love to have that conversation if you think that's good to have here, but that's really the distinction. And then you start getting into the classic bell curve adoption that we've seen. The early adopters are going after those kinds of AI first platforms, because they're innovators. And then you're going to get the bubble will come after, right?
Well, and I'm curious to that, because I mean, you make some really valid points here, and I'm curious what you think and how you differentiate between an AI native general ledger versus a traditional GL that then either themselves build out and bolt on AI features on it, or you buy a secondary program that then, gives you those types of benefits.
All right. So what I will do is I will compare. Let me start by talking about ChatGPT versus Copilot. And I'm going to do that because I'm going to make a point, and then I'm going to carry that point over. ChatGPT, of course, they're both heavy investments of Microsoft. One is all Microsoft, the other is heavily invested by Microsoft. So we know that Microsoft has their finger in both pies. It's not about the company, it's about the nature of the application. So if I go to ChatGPT, even in my enterprise version that shows my logo, that's privatized, that I can put sensitive data into and it protects me, I can ask it questions and I can ask it about anything. Who was that actor in the Titanic who played the captain? It knows, it's sort of more omniscient, right? But what I can't ask it, and this is the point I'm going to be making, is I can't ask it to go look at my email, read all my emails, and find out what my confirmation number was for my Marriott stay 2 years ago in New York City. Because it would say, if you will upload this data to me, I'm happy to go look at it. Now, I know you can write API calls, you can build integrations. The point I'm making is natively, it's generally omniscient, but about Joe Woodard and his companies, it is very blind. Now you go to Copilot, and I can ask Copilot that exact question. And I don't even have to tell it to go look at my email. I can just say, what was the confirmation number for my New York stay? And I can give it a date or about 2 years ago. And it will find all matching confirmation numbers by reading all of my email. Because we use Microsoft 365, all of our data is shared in SharePoint, in Word, in Excel, in every place, PowerPoint, every place where it can get to that data. Plus, Copilot is able to go read the wider web if it wants to do so. Now it is truly omniscient, specifically and generally, right? Now, if you take a product like Digits, Digits is more like Copilot in the sense that it can see more organic data about its own platform. Now, that can be true of Intuit Assist because it can look at its own general ledger. But if you look at all of the different pieces that have to go into place in order for QuickBooks Online or Xero or these more small business solutions to stretch in the mid-market, you're going to have a lot of integrated apps, many more kinds of integrated apps. And the more data points that are not organic to the data point you're involved in, the blinder the AI is. AI is only as good as the data that it can read. It's a one-legged stool without data. So I believe that in the long run, the platforms where the AI is owned, the AI owns the GL instead of what's happening now where you have AI-enabled month-end close tools. They're fantastic. They work great. TrueWin's a good example of those, but it sits outside of, which means it can see the data only that is available through the application programming interface of QuickBooks or of Xero or of NetSuite, right? Everything else is a blind spot. A product like Digits has no blind spots, not when it comes to the accounting data.
Good point. And I'm curious too, because back to your, when you were talking pretty much bell curve, right? The majority of where they're at in their adoption, will we get to a point to where they're just using AI regardless of if they intentionally went and implemented it or not? I mean, it's just going to be, it's table stakes for all of the vendors.
Yeah, it's table stakes to adopt it consciously. But even if you're listening to this and you think you're not using AI, you're using AI.
I mean, even us as just consumers and just in our regular lives, we're using AI in places.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. We're using tools that have AI enablement. It's the reality of our technological world.
100%. You brought up large firms. I do have a question there. Do you feel like the large firms are gaining an advantage by building their own AI tools and capabilities versus just relying on off-the-shelf tools that maybe some of the smaller firms are?
Okay, well, first, yes and no. Okay, so that's a great question because it's a relative answer. I love those kind. So first, if you are not a top 100 size CPA firm in listening to this podcast, I would encourage you to look very hard at the tools that are being programmed by others. I mean, even if you're not a top 50 firm, I would say look very hard at the tools. I want to say almost look only at the tools, but I want to be careful. Look very hard at the tools that are being programmed on your behalf. Because the only way, in my opinion, to make your own custom coding. Now, I don't mean like programming bots or building agents on top of another platform. I mean, even I, Kacee, know how to build an agent in Copilot. They've made it so easy. It's like building a Zap and Zapier if you want the basic ones, right? We're talking about actually coding AI programs, right? And you've seen the same thing I've seen. You've seen the top 10, the top 20 that are hiring AI talent and they're coding their own platforms, right? We know this is happening. So the reason they're doing that is because there are two reasons. One, they can afford it. It's extremely expensive, right? Second, and this is the most important one, because affording and cost of benefit are two different things, right? So what's the benefit of the cost? They have scale. So if you're going to build your own proprietary artificial intelligence platform, the only way you're going to get the benefit from the cost, and the cost is not one and done, it's ongoing, it's recurring, constant development and innovation, is by creating extreme scales of revenue out of extreme efficiencies on the backside. Plus, you have to be able to infuse into the valuation of your firm the intellectual properties that you're investing in. And yes, I guess even a small firm could claim intellectual property, right, benefits, but what are they actually worth in the open market if they're not programmed to the degree of excellence of a, PE-backed or VC-backed company, then you're probably not building IP that's going to really help you. So to me, I know I keep thinning it down. I said 100, then I said 50, then I said 20. I don't know where the exact cutoff is. I just know that the answer to your question is only if they do it well, only if they have the money to burn, the cash to burn on the long game, and only if they can build to where what they build will have scale in its economics. You combine those three things together, and I don't know that makes it worth it, Kacee, because it's a lot of risk. We talk about cost to benefit. There's also risk to reward, but at least they're not unwise to go after it at that level.
Yeah. And I mean, they do have deep pockets. They've got more resources than that. But I do believe, though, truly, I mean, some of the products and solutions I see coming out to the marketplace are just incredible. And they're purpose built. And I just think what's available in the marketplace is just as good and without a lot of those headaches or risk, to your point.
It's long-term, short-term cost, right? If you're playing a 10-year ROI and the scaled pricing of a solution that's in the open market, even if they work favorably with the firm over a 10-year run, you may end up with a higher cost than developing and maintaining. And that's really the math that these folks are running.
And Joe, you brought up a good point too, also about the resources with the larger firms, about the staff, right? You've got to hire the staff to build all of this. But we've heard for years that upskilling is needed in the profession. And obviously AI is kind of moving this along even quicker. When looking, especially to your point about the CAS practice is probably the first one that is adopting the fastest, right? And you're looking at a shift from analytics to advisory. What are the most in-demand skills that the talent needs to be worried about today, as well as, I know it's hard to look forward beyond like 6 months at this point because it all moves so fast, but even thinking 2 to 3 years out?
Yeah, well, I happen to have some whispers in my ear that are helping me see deeper into the future. Michio Kaku, who is the theoretical physicist. If you don't know his name, if you Google him, you will know his face. He's interviewed on news outlets and History Channel shows. He just came and spoke at Scaling New Heights. I had the opportunity to sit down and talk with him about that very question, both on the stage and for an hour off stage. And then Daniel Susskind, whose 2 works I've read, The Future of the Professions and A World Without Work. Both of those books I strongly recommend. So these 2 great minds, Oxford professor, theoretical physicist, have said that the jobs that will persist into the future, the longest, are going to be those that require a physicality to them. And then the second would be a human interaction that cannot, or this is a David Susskind line, cannot or ought not be performed by a bot. Just because a bot can do a thing doesn't mean ought it do that thing. So I've started referring to this metaphorically as the final mile. And for those listeners that are not familiar with this term, you're nodding. I know you are, Kacee. UPS, FedEx, now Amazon and delivery. The most expensive and the most difficult part of that delivery is not in literally the final mile, right? 5,200 feet. It's in the figurative mile, that last step to get from the last distribution or closest distribution center to the house. And that's job security for drivers. Almost everything else has been automated all the way through the truckloads, all the way down to that final mile. So if we use that now metaphorically and we say, accountants, what is your final mile? Because and I've not kept up with the latest press releases over at Digits or Puzzle or some of these other technologies. But Kacee, I think that there are a few examples of 100%, but I think on the average, they're achieving about 85 to 90%, depending on the complexity of the books and automation. Is that about right?
I think I've seen like 95, 96, but
yeah. So it's even getting higher, right? But it's not that because it jumped from 90 to 95, it's going to go from 95 to 100 quickly. The final mile, like getting from 98 to 100%, Herculean. Getting from 99 to 100%, it's going to be almost magical, right? So find out what that 1%, 2%, 5% that the bots are going to never do or are not going to do for the distant future. Now, I'll give you some examples so we can land the balloon. I like to hold these up because I'm one of those people that when I make mobile deposits, even after it deposits, I just still keep the check in the drawer because I'm just nervous. Yeah.
Oh God, my husband does this and it drives me crazy. Like, did you deposit?
And I purge the drawer every month, right? I mean, I could keep going. The pile is just huge, right? Digits can't do anything with this. Not until I touch it. Right? I might be able to scan it in and Digits know how to deal with it, but until I touch it, it can't do a thing. And I still have to pick up my phone. I still have to take a picture of the front, sign the back, take a picture of the back, and push several buttons in order to get that in. So paper checks, as long as they endure in our society, and we love them in the U.S. as opposed to countries like Australia.
They're like, what? You guys still mail checks?
People are still mailing checks around. We do. We mail tens of millions of them every single year. Our government still, though there's a phase-out period now, is still mailing checks. So as long as paper checks exist, which I think is another 5 years at least, we're going to have a final mile. It's in another drawer someplace. Actually, it's not. I scanned it and shredded it. Business licenses. Those get mailed to me. And they're in my particular county, you cannot go online and file it. You have to fill it out and you have to put it in the returned self-addressed envelope and figure out where to go buy a stamp. I don't even know where to buy a stamp. I don't know where the post office is. So I just keep it in the car until I happen to be riding by and I put it in that drop box that they invented in 1975. So as long as there are these, community banks and local jurisdictions and all these little, vacuum spots that are hard to touch by the bots, there's going to be a final mile. Now I'm going to put the final mile not so much into the mechanics, business licenses, business permits, paper checks. Okay, those are going to be the final mile administratively for a while. But there's also the final mile you referred to in terms of advisory. And I love what you said. You didn't say bookkeeping versus advisory. You said analytics versus advisory. It's an important distinction because analytics is already displaced. I mean, that's fodder for artificial intelligence. It's candy, right? But interpreting is subjective as well as objective. There are way too many variables for artificial intelligence to understand. It can analyze it logically. It can tell you what it thinks, and I'm using my air quotes for those of you not watching the video because it mimics human thinking. But does it understand the relational dynamics between the owner of the company and their spouse, or the deep friendship with the business tension that's formed from the business owner having hired a lifelong friend that's underperforming? when it just goes, well, you need to fire this employee. Okay. Does it understand? Does it really know? Right. And can it sympathize with a person's work performance or a business unit's performance when it comes into human factors like health, psychology, the dynamics of a team interaction, the changeover that took place in a team? And even if it can begin to interpret those things, it will never understand the human psyche. We, as humans, can't even understand our own psyche. We certainly can't program a computer that can mimic our thinking and somehow get there. So that's the final mile of the human brain, the human to human part. And I know this is a bit of a spoiler alert, but the theme for this coming Scaling New Heights is Strange New World, because we're talking about a strange new world we're living in, right? And the emphasis, this, if you don't want to know what the end of the story is, folks, tune out. But I'm about to tell you the end of the story. Spoiler alert. It's going to be intensely human. That as we embrace artificial intelligence, we need to figure out a way to make that artificial intelligence liberate us to be more human instead of what it will naturally do if we're not careful. And that's make us less human, right? Make us more of its servant instead of it our servant.
You can't deny that fintech solutions are getting more sophisticated. The clients are going to be getting their analytics and their data directly from the systems before their accountant even picks up the phone. So I love this about getting insanely human, because that is where we're going to win. And a lot of times what they get delivered from the systems, the business owner may not, they may need some more.
And Kacee, it's not just in the use of wisdom, because that's really what we're talking about here, is the difference between knowledge and wisdom, right? Wisdom is going to be a big part of it. And advisory is going to be increasingly focused on sort of our Yoda moments with our clients. But there's another aspect of human to human where those accountants that embrace it are going to be leading those accountants who don't. And that's in the emotional side, the how you make me feel. Ron Baker breaks down two core components of value. And he said, and I have challenged everyone that I have spoken to, every group of people I've spoken to find a third, and no one can find a third. There are two things people will exchange their money for: how you solve my problem and how you make me feel. Well, AI is increasingly going to solve the problems, but people are turning to AI to feel a feeling. I mean, there are all these articles now where people are falling in love with AI agents, and Grok has come out with these I don't know if you've seen them or not. It's kind of laughable, but scary. These very seductive animes. If you haven't seen this, you've got to go look at this. It's like creepy, right? And you can pick a guy or you can pick a girl, whatever your liking is, and they will talk seductively to you. So I'm telling you, it's crazy. And so some people are gravitating to that because they want to feel a feeling. But increasingly, we're going to understand that's fabricated, it's farce, it's fake, right? So I'll give you a story of something that artificial intelligence can never do. When I was going through one of the darkest chapters of my business journey, back in 2018, I even had to restructure under Chapter 11. I mean, everybody, it's very public. It made Accounting Today in the headlines, right? So everybody knows. It was a very difficult moment in my career journey. We came through it, but in the middle of it, right before I had to go here, I met my CPA, who was also a business mentor for me. And I met him, I still remember, it was a Panera Bread. I can remember like it was yesterday. And I remember, this is where I'm going to get emotional, but I was breaking down everything that was going on and how all the circumstances hit me sideways and unforeseeable situations. And what do I do? And how do I manage this? And I remember it was all Yoda. It was all wisdom. It was not the sort of thing that even today ChatGPT could have gotten me through. It took a human. But there was something else that happened at breakfast too. Not in an appropriate way, just in an appropriate way. He put his hand over on top of my hand, on top of the table, and said, "You will get through this. Now, tell me any artificial intelligence that can mimic that. Now, so if you're listening here and you're an accountant, you need to find that part of your role with your clients. I think what's going to happen, Kacee, and this, if you're going to ask me like far-reaching future, or if you're going to ask me what's going to endure the longest, I think there's going to be a closer connection in the future between accountancy, the accountant profession, and the ministerial profession. And I don't mean that in a religious sense. I mean it in a nature sense. There is no profession that is more protected from artificial intelligence than the ministerial profession, because I'm not going to have artificial intelligence officiate my funeral or comfort me when someone dies, right? Or perform a wedding. I mean, I'm sure there will be those people that do that, but come on. If we can find a way to reach into the more human side of accountancy, I'm old enough. If you're watching this podcast, you see all the gray hair in my beard. I'm old enough to remember when CPAs used to use that term, Kacee. They used to say, I was called into accountancy. The senior partner at the firm I was at in the 1990s, he was very much my senior. He'd be like 100 today. He used that term when he was called into accountancy. I don't know if you've ever heard anybody use that term. I think we kind of need to get back there.
And I just want to say, you said that he told you would get through it. I think you came out even stronger and better on the other side. So I wanted to.
It was a bit of a refiner's fire.
I'd give you a hug if I was in person with you, but you came out strong.
I don't know if he could foresee it. He probably couldn't, but he definitely encouraged me for something. It helped. So, but thank you for that.
Okay, on the same thread about skills and talent, you've talked about accountants being AI coders. Do you believe that, again, the majority, the bell curve, not like the outliers, that CPAs really want that role?
No, they don't want that role. So when I talked about AIs being coders, and I was referring to those top 20, or maybe top 50 that are deploying those programming departments. And we've kind of talked through that. I would, just like I said earlier, I would strongly recommend that anybody under that top 50 size take a hard look at the things that are already programmed. And then make sure you do your full cost of benefit analyses, large firms, before you start going down that rabbit hole. Now, I do think, however, Kacee, that the more innovative accountants and the ones that are going to get to the greatest levels of efficiency are going to be those that make friends with the low code side of AI. Just like it's analogous to where the accountants that were sort of most bleeding edge knew how to code their own zaps, so they could fill in all those gaps that where the integration wasn't working right. And of course, those gaps are getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller, right? But they filled those gaps for a decade with these low code tools. And they stayed ahead of the curve. They differentiated their practice by being 10 years ahead, and then 5 years ahead until finally it caught up with them. And still today, there are some things you can only do with zaps. I believe that there are going to be these micro processes that will endure for a long time, 5, 10, maybe even 15 years, that you can program using the agent programming tools or the project tools of ChatGPT and Copilot platforms like them. And I would strongly encourage accountants to either learn how to do that, invest in learning, or to find contracted or maybe resources, or maybe employ one person in your firm who can be your ChatGPT or Copilot guru or geek to do some of that work.
Yeah. And let's talk a little, as we're thinking about talent, I want to talk a little bit about the offshoring and the capacity issues in the profession and how AI can enable and solve some of that. I, early on, like 2-3 years ago, got so excited about how AI could help with the capacity crunch. And I think many see it that way, but some also see it as a negative of, then it's going to take our jobs, or, what does this do to the economics and how we price things if the tools are doing it? What's your thinking on this?
All right, there's a lot in that question. So first, will it take jobs? It absolutely will. There's a quote out there that I strongly disagree with. The quote says that AI will not replace accountants, it will replace accountants that don't use AI. And that's a derivative of a quote about replacing humans, right? And it sounds good and it feels good. And we want to believe that that's true. But unfortunately, it's not true. It will replace accountants. The better way to phrase it is that it will replace a large percentage of the work of accountancy. So you have to ask yourself, what kind of accountant work am I doing? And am I doing that kind of final mile work that it can't do, right? And am I ignoring it or am I leveraging it so that I can be more efficient? So first, that's one. It will thin down the ranks of the profession. In 10 years, in my opinion, nobody can see the future. The accounting profession will be much smaller than it is today, even as it services a larger segment of the market than it does today. So revenues will go up disproportionately to headcount. Now, some of that may be termination of employees. Some of it may be a slowing in hiring. Some of it may be that we just stop trying to compensate for the massive retire off that we're experiencing or the student shortage that we're experiencing. We all have heard those numbers. Maybe we just see all that as merciful, that if AI is going to thin down the ranks of accountancy that much, it couldn't happen at a better time than when a bunch of accountants are retiring and a bunch of people don't want to become accountants. It's perfect. It's a planetary alignment. Stop trying to fix that problem and just embrace AI. Now, that's part of it. And in the US, the jobs are already so thinned down that we will not be as impacted as heavily because the staffing crisis has hit us broadside here. As you mentioned, the countries that are going to get hit the hardest are India and the Philippines. You didn't mention those by name, but you know that's the typical two that you think of when you think of offshoring. Not so much South Africa because it's not as big of a chunk of their economy. The Philippines is going to get hit the hardest because it is a larger percentage of their economy than it is in India. I don't want to seem non-sympathetic because I am extremely sympathetic with any disruption in the way it impacts any human. But progress is inherently disruptive. There used to be people that built cars. Now robots build cars. There used to be people that drove cars. Now robots are driving cars. There used to be people who were computers. The movie Hidden Figures, the three ladies in Hidden Figures were hired under the job description of computer. They were called computers. But who thinks of a person as a computer these days, right? So change just happens. And we can't stop that wheel. We can't stop that disruption. We just need to understand and embrace for the impact of it that these market segments that have emerged in the Philippines and India are going to change drastically over the next 5 to 10 years.
And you're spot on about they're not machines. They shouldn't be treated like machines. And sometimes I get efficiency is such a big layer of the AI conversation, but I think it was Ron Baker. I heard him say, stop talking about your people being more efficient and talk about them being more effective.
That's exactly right. But what's happening, and don't get me wrong, they're brilliant people in those staffing centers, right? They're credentialed accountants. They're very smart folks. They can adapt just like we can adapt over here. It's the same message. But if they think they're going to be able to provide for their families by key punching in data or performing bank recs, then they have their head in the sand as much as they would in the US. It's the same problem. It's just that disproportionately, their livelihoods are built off of that highly displaceable side of the work, the key punching side of the work, and then here in the US. So if you're listening here and you own one of these companies, you lead in one of these companies or work in one of these companies, you need to invest in the same kind of final mile skills that I'm encouraging every one of the listeners to invest in. And we haven't actually called it by name, but Kacee, there's nobody more familiar with the CPA the CAS 2.0 model than you, right? So in the CAS 2.0 model, there's this component called controllership. I would encourage your listeners to take a hard look at that piece of the CAS model because it's the place where the final mile hangs out.
Final mile. I like that. I feel like we're going to have to name this episode that. That's a good title for this. But so Joe, and you organically kind of pulled out the biggest opportunity for the firm. So I love that. I'm curious, what is like, I'm sure people ask you, what is the first thing, those firms that are listening that are in that bell curve and have been kind of standoffish, what's the first thing they need to do? What do they need to do today?
They need to go to ChatGPT and they need to have a conversation with it. Don't provide any personal or sensitive information unless it's a privatized version. And don't ask it a question like, how can I find a website? Have a conversation with it. And that you'll see how easy it is. It really is like talking to a human. The next step after you have a conversation with it, and make it about anything that's of interest to you. I'm a Star Trek geek. So if I was going to do this, I would go out and just say, who was the better captain, Kirk or Picard? And I would see what its opinion was and how it broke it down. It would probably create a comparative graph for me, right? It's fun. Have
would
fun
you argue with it?
It's Picard. I would argue if it said anything otherwise. But the bald guy's got to stick together, right? But then the next step, once you've understood how to have a conversation with it, then treat it like an employee and ask it to do something that you would normally ask an employee to do, and walk it through what has to happen as clearly as you would explain it to an employee. It's not magical. It has to be instructed. And then see if it can write Visual Basic script for you or build an Excel formula or create an entire Excel spreadsheet. So to give you an example, I was on a coaching call with one of the firms that I coach, and she said, I need to know how to break down a shared employee set of entries, and I need a worksheet because this is the first time I've encountered that. And we normally don't get technical on that, but I happen to know how to do that because we do it over here at Woodard. So I said, well, watch what I can do. And I went to ChatGPT and I explained the problem, and I asked it to build a worksheet. And I gave it, I'm in a privatized version. So I gave it some information about my member's company and the percentage breakdowns. And it built a spreadsheet with all of the formulas. It had 3 different sheets on it. And all I had to do was plug in the numbers for that payroll. And it broke down all the debits and credits for me and told me exactly what to enter into each set of books. It's not rocket science. I just asked it and told it how to answer, and it did all the work for me.
Okay, so lightning round, Joe. What is your favorite AI tool that you use personally, not in business?
Oh, the Copilot, hands down.
Well, it knows everything about Joe. That's fine. So
it does, because we live in a Microsoft 365 universe. Yes.
You've mentioned a few things, people who have inspired you, but what's a book, a podcast, a resource that shaped how you think about AI?
AI specifically. That's then I'm going to go back to Susskind, and it's going to be a close tie between the future of the professions and a world without work, but I'm going to go with a world without work.
A little bit of a personal question, but I love that you bring your daughter on stage with you. I'm curious, how does she feel about it? Does she get nervous? Does she like being up there? What does she say?
About AI?
No, about being up on stage with you.
Oh, about being on stage. No, she's a natural. She loves being on stage. So that's not a problem. No, she actually even had a sort of a little bit of an acting career. It could have gone a lot farther if she had wanted it, but she actually has her own scene in a movie with Uma Thurman, and she was on a second callback to be one of the children in a show called Black Lightning. She was going to be one of Black Lightning's 2 daughters. If you're listening to this podcast, my daughter's Black. So I remember the day she marched into our living room. She was about 8 years old, and she goes, "I'm bored with this. I don't want to do it anymore." So we're like, you came this far. You're almost in a television show. But looking back on it, I'm so thankful that she didn't get on that roller coaster. But she's a natural on stage.
Yeah,
but I can also answer the question in the vein of the podcast. How does my daughter, in her generation, she just turned 18 years old. She just started the architectural school at NYU. What does she think about AI, right? And she's having this conversation with her peers already. She's having this conversation with her professors already. And interestingly enough, her professors are telling her, and she's only in her second week of classes, exactly what areas of architecture are going to survive and which areas are not. And it's parallel to the accounting profession. It's going to be those areas where it's going to take human creativity. Think about Frank Lloyd Wright versus just building a building like a Fairfield Inn on the side of the interstate, and you're going to get the future. It's going to be a fusion of architecture and art. And the artists who are architects are going to survive. Just like the CPAs who figuratively or literally put their hand on top of their client's hand are going to survive.
She's finding her final mile. I like it.
Yeah, she's finding her final mile.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Joe. It's always such a pleasure to catch up with you and see you.
It was great to be here, Kacee. Thank you.
And thank you to our listeners for tuning in. We would love to hear your thoughts and experiences in this area. If you want to deploy AI native accounting for your firm, visit digits.com to explore today. Stay tuned for future episodes of the AI Native Accounting Podcast, which will be available on all of your favorite streaming platforms. And until next time, stay curious, stay ahead, and find your final mile.
You've been tuned in to AI Native Accounting, powered by Digits, the world's first autonomous general ledger. Unlock automation for bookkeeping, reporting, client collaboration, and more. Let Digits handle the tedium so you can focus on high-impact client services. See why AI Native Accounting starts with Digits. Try it for free today at digits.com.